Samantha can't even be useful in the kitchen. I bet she doesn't serve good meals at home. Suddenly, all the cold stares in the room turned to me, seeing my reaction. Bob, feeling even more confident, began to boast loudly. "Man, my wife's cooking is terrible." "Huh, when did you taste my cooking? Aren't your meals always at your mistress's place?" "What?" I raised my voice, exposing Bob's infidelity. "It's no lie. I have evidence right here." I pointed to the documents held by my father-in-law. "My name is Samantha Waters, 35 years old. I've always been intimidated by the assertiveness some men have, even finding it scary. I have had very few romantic relationships and hardly dated. By the time I reached what they call middle age, my parents became concerned and suggested arranged dates. At first I refused, but with few opportunities to meet men and my parents pushing, I felt the pressure to marry and went on several arranged dates. One of them was with Bob. Bob was a kind, responsible man and an elite employee at a top-tier company. Though he was big both in height and build, he wasn't intimidating, and I didn't find him scary. Talks of marriage went smoothly, and I met Bob's parents. Bob's family runs a traditional cooking school, and his father is a renowned master in the field. Bob's father, a serious man, always wore traditional outfits, which made me stand a little straighter every time I met him. On the other hand, my mother-in-law was soft-spoken, with a kind face brightened by dimples when she smiled. Bob and I decided to get married. My parents were over the moon, saying I had hit the jackpot. A condition of our marriage was for me to become a housewife, so I quit my administrative job at an electronics company. Even then, my colleagues teased me about marrying up. Looking back, that might have been the peak of my happiness. Bob told me he's currently swamped at work and might not be able to come home often, asking for my patience. He wanted to achieve certain milestones in his current job before quitting and helping with the family business. I admired his commitment and decided to support him. Years into our marriage, Bob rarely came home. I knew he would be busy, but I didn't expect this. Most nights, I'd be alone in the living room of our apartment, which Bob's parents had generously provided for us, waiting for him. Guess he's not coming home tonight. I've only cooked for Bob a few times since we got married. He hardly ever came home, and when he did, it was very late. He often went on business trips, sometimes leaving home for days. He usually ate out and worked late into the night. Despite coming home late, he'd be up and out extremely early. I'd often worry if he was getting enough rest or eating nutritious meals. He'd leave without even having breakfast. One morning, as Bob was getting ready, I asked him why he didn't eat at home. "Bob, I wish you'd have a proper meal." Without even looking at me as he was fixing his tie, he said, "It's fine, work's just really busy right now." "Don't worry about it, Samantha." Bob just said that and immediately left the house. Even on weekends, he's at work from early morning until late at night, regardless of whether it's Saturday, Sunday, or a holiday. He's often away on business trips. At first, I thought maybe Bob was trying to give me space, avoiding being at home too much, or perhaps he was embarrassed. I even thought such sweet things at one point. When he's out this much, it feels like I'm living alone. Bob has very few belongings, only the bare essentials. Naturally, we don't converse much, so I don't know Bob's hobbies, his favorite foods, or what he dislikes. Did I do something wrong? I pondered that as well. I talked to my parents about it, but they just said something like, men being busy with work is just right, and didn't take my concerns seriously. Even my few friends said, it's better if the husband is out earning and not home, even saying they envy me. They too don't seem concerned about my feelings. While Bob handles the finances and always provides enough for our monthly expenses, so there's no financial insecurity, but this very lack of insecurity makes me worry more. I keep blaming myself, thinking I might have done something to upset him. I wonder if I'm lacking as a wife. I clean thoroughly, and I've been learning to cook, trying to make delicious meals every day. In the limited time Bob is home, when he sees my anxious face, he tries to reassure me, "Samantha, you're doing just fine." I forced myself to believe this is just how some couples are, but recently my father-in-law scolded me. I received a call from him at the end of the year. Getting a call from my father-in-law is rare, so I was taken aback when he suddenly yelled at me, making me drop the phone. "Samantha, what on earth are you thinking?" Did something happen? Don't play dumb. Why aren't you attending the family gatherings every single year? It was news to me that there were family gatherings. I had talked to Bob about New Year greetings before. He told me every New Year's Day the students from the cooking school come to greet his parents, so the family doesn't gather. Moreover, he said if the family did gather, there'd be too many people, making things unmanageable. Usually, only Bob goes to his parents' home with New Year's gifts. First of all, if you aren't attending this year's gathering, shouldn't you apologize for not being able to? His stern voice made me freeze. It's a New Year's tradition for me to stay home, while only Bob goes to his parents. I've been very careful with the New Year's gifts and greeting cards, trying to be as courteous as possible. I did suggest to Bob that maybe I should call, but he always said his parents were super busy around the New Year's, and I assumed it was because his father was a renowned cooking teacher. I was also a bit scared of meeting my strict father-in-law. According to him, the family gathers on January 1st for a New Year's party, and the students start visiting from January 2nd. I could only apologize over the phone. My father-in-law just criticized me, then hung up. After the call, my mind was filled with questions. What did Bob mean by "Samantha, you don't need to come"? Why did he lie about there being no family gathering? Did Bob really not want me to attend that much? That night, around midnight, Bob came home. I felt this was the only chance, so I braced myself and asked Bob about the New Year's gathering. "I got a call from your dad today. He was upset that I'm not attending the New Year's gathering." Bob sighed heavily and replied with an irritated tone, "You know how it feels to be at a place with so many people. Plus, many wives don't like going to their husband's family home, right? That's why I was trying to be considerate." I was shocked at Bob's misunderstood kindness. Sure, many might dislike visiting their spouse's family. I've heard my friends complain about it, but to never go even once, that's a bit much, isn't it? Bob was reluctant, but I insisted on attending the gathering. The Waters family's New Year's party was a grand affair, with a lot of relatives gathered, exchanging greetings. At last, you showed up. It's only natural for family to attend such events. My father-in-law said sternly. Even when I told him that Bob had said there wasn't any family gathering, my father-in-law remained furious. "You've been avoiding us because you didn't want to see us," he accused. Unable to respond to his anger, I gave up on arguing. The rest of the family also gave me cold looks. I expected that and decided to endure. What I couldn't stand, however, was that Bob didn't come to my aid at all. Instead, he just quietly drank his beer. As the night progressed and drinks flowed, people started coming over to me with complaints. "I've never seen you do any housework. That's all Bob ever talks about," one said. In my mind, I whispered, "It's because Bob hardly ever comes home. You probably don't cook often, and when you do, it's not even tasty. That's why he always ends up eating out." Another chimed in. The words that came from the relatives were unfamiliar to me. What had Bob been telling them? I couldn't understand why he belittled me like that. Given everyone's stern remarks, I couldn't do anything but sincerely apologize. I helped out in the kitchen, serving drinks, feeling like I was walking on eggshells. I barely managed to greet all the relatives and students before heading home, completely drained. Bob said he was going to head straight to work from his parents' house, so like in the morning, he was on his own in the evening. Looking back, a lot of things seemed odd. Why did Bob say there wasn't any family gathering? Now there's talk that I'm that wife who doesn't do any chores. Could there be a connection between Bob not coming home and these rumors? Once something piqued my interest, I couldn't let it go. Luckily, I had plenty of time. I decided to follow Bob and see what he was up to. It's what you often hear detectives on TV call tail surveillance, or simply tailing. In the morning, I discreetly followed Bob when he left. I knew where Bob's company was, so I had no trouble tailing him there. It felt a bit exciting, like I was playing detective. It felt more fulfilling than just spending a day at home. I killed time at cafes and diners near his workplace and followed him when he left. That day he didn't do anything suspicious and returned to the office in the evening. I kept an eye on him from a cafe with a view of his office, and around 7 p.m., Bob came out. Was he leaving work early today? If he headed straight home, he would find out I wasn't there. I rushed home and managed to get there before Bob, hurriedly making dinner and waiting for him. But Bob didn't come home until after midnight. I felt something was off, so I decided to tail him again the next day. Bob's routine was the same from morning till evening. He'd go to the office, leave for a bit, and return in the evening. The real question was what he did afterward. As I kept an eye on him from a different diner, around 6 p.m., Bob left his office. Today I decided to tail him directly. Instead of heading towards the station for home, Bob started walking in a different direction. I hesitated for a moment. Bob was headed towards a downtown area lined with motels, much like Las Vegas's red light district. I mustered the courage to follow, but lost him. As I was looking around, Bob suddenly appeared before me. Both of us were startled and just stared at each other. Bob was the first to speak. "Samantha, what are you doing here?" Caught off guard, I stuttered. "Why are you here of all places? What have you been up to during the day?" I was taken aback. Bob was the suspicious one, not me, yet he was acting like I was up to no good. First off, get back home. "We'll talk then." Being scolded by Bob in such a public place was too embarrassing, so I practically ran back home. The moment Bob got home late that night, he confronted me with something unbelievable. "You think just because you're bored at home you can follow your husband around? Why the hell should I have to support someone like you?" I tried to defend myself, albeit weakly. "I do take care of the house. Just because you do a little cleaning, don't say you're handling the chores. From now on, you've got a budget of $100 for the month." I was speechless. How am I supposed to live on just $100? The water and electricity bills are automatically deducted from my account, and I bet my food isn't costing you much, Bob said with a nasty smirk. "At least let me work part-time then." Looking down on me, Bob sneered. "No way. You work full-time just like me and don't even think about skimping on the housework." No matter how much I tried to argue, Bob's mind was made up. In the end, I had to return to my previous job at an electronics company. Now I was stuck doing all the housework on top of a full-time job. My life suddenly became incredibly hectic. I had no time for my detective hobby anymore. I was swamped with work and chores. Ever since that day, Bob had been constantly berating me, nitpicking about the housework. Every morning in the brief moment we crossed paths, he'd find something to complain about. "The windows are dirty. There's dust in the hallway. You didn't iron my shirt." And because I worked too, I had to handle these chores at night. Before I knew it, it was the end of the year, and the New Year's gathering was approaching. Bob, as always, said I shouldn't attend. "You should stay home. No need to join the gathering." I figured it was pointless to argue, so I kept silent. As Bob left, he threw a parting shot. "You're an embarrassment. I wouldn't want you in front of our relatives." His cruel words stunned me. How could Bob say something like that? I work from morning till night and handle all the housework. How could he be so harsh? Regardless, I decided to attend the New Year's gathering without telling Bob. I had to let my in-laws, Mr. and Mrs. Waters, see the real Bob. Tightly gripping the thick envelope I had just received, I headed to the Waters house for the New Year's gathering. I took a deep breath and opened the door. At the New Year's gathering, when I suddenly showed up, Bob looked shocked. But probably because he didn't want to make a scene in front of everyone, he just glared at me without saying a word. His relatives' gazes toward me were as cold as ever. They were all whispering, condemning me. I'm sure they've all just been fooled by my husband. I didn't let it bother me. Enduring their cold stares, I was in the kitchen preparing the food and drinks. After a while, maybe because the alcohol started to hit him, Bob began to loudly criticize me. Samantha can't even be useful in the kitchen. She doesn't even serve decent food at home. Everyone's icy stares turned to me all at once. Seeing that, Bob became even more arrogant, shouting out loud, "Man, my wife's cooking sucks." I caught the stern look of my father-in-law. "What the hell is going on here? What have you been doing, Samantha? Maybe you're not suitable to be Bob's wife." With my father-in-law raising his voice, everyone's attention was on me. The moment everyone thought I was going to get a lecture, I stood up to Bob and began to counter-argue. "Excuse me, have you ever tasted my cooking? Aren't you always at your mistress' place?" Caught off guard, my father-in-law's mouth was agape. "What the heck are you talking about?" While everyone was in shock, only Bob tried to desperately make excuses. "Come on, Samantha. Just because people are talking bad about you doesn't mean you should spread such lies." Turning to my father-in-law, Bob started to defend himself. "Dad, I don't have a mistress, I swear." "I hope so." My father-in-law seemed to want to believe Bob. He nodded in agreement to Bob's words over mine. Thinking he had regained my father-in-law's trust, Bob puffed up his chest and started to shoot back, always saying crazy stuff. "There's something really wrong with you." It wasn't just a spur-of-the-moment claim that Bob had a mistress. I pulled an envelope from my bag, showing the documents inside to my in-laws. Bob continued to vehemently criticize me. "Hey, apologize now and I'll forgive you for lying." The relatives seemed to believe that Bob didn't have a mistress. They sent me stern glares. My father-in-law and mother-in-law were seriously reading the documents. The documents I provided were the result of an investigation into Bob's infidelity. It was clear that Bob's behavior was suspicious, so I had hired a private investigator to dig deeper. The results from the investigator were clear. Bob was caught red-handed. The reason Bob wasn't coming home was that he was with his mistress. He mostly spent his time at her apartment, and sometimes they would even check into motels. Bob was always eating at his mistress' place. The time I ran into Bob in a motel district, he was about to meet his mistress there. I loudly exposed Bob's infidelity. "It's not a lie, the evidence is right here." I pointed to the documents my father-in-law was holding. "The apartment you see Bob entering is not our apartment." Murmurs arose from the relatives. "Hey, Bob, is this true? What's going on? Is this some kind of fabrication?" My father-in-law and mother-in-law were engrossed in the photos. "Bob, is this true?" Sweating, Bob tried his best to deny it. "No, that's not true. I don't have a mistress." What my father-in-law and mother-in-law were fixated on were the photos of Bob holding hands with an unknown woman entering an unfamiliar apartment, pictures of them picking out jewelry together in a store, snaps of them drinking wine in a fancy restaurant, pictures of them shopping for groceries. In all of them, Bob's carefree smile was captured. I relentlessly confronted Bob. "You mentioned you've been busy with overtime every day, right?" Bob's face turned red and he fell silent. "Why did you lie about not wanting to see the family or that the food isn't good?" Bob seemed to be playing dumb even now. Everyone went quiet as Bob and I argued. Then a loud voice from my mother-in-law filled the room. "Bob, what on earth are you doing?" Bob was taken aback by her sudden outburst. "No, that's not it." My mother-in-law, usually a gentle soul, now had a stern, almost menacing look in her eyes. Even though she wasn't yelling at me, I was still scared. "What do you mean? Are you saying all of this is made up?" She spoke in a calm voice now, but it was even more chilling. The other family members remained silent, overwhelmed by her presence. So the story about Samantha was a lie. Explain yourself." Relatives whispered among themselves. "I've never seen her so mad. She's always smiling, but she's the scariest when she's angry." Seemingly resigned, Bob sat down in a traditional manner and began to explain in a soft voice. "I knew that woman before we got married. We met at a club in Las Vegas. The room buzzed with whispers. Both my father-in-law and mother-in-law looked at Bob sternly. With wet spots appearing on the floor, it seemed like Bob might be crying. So I thought of marrying any suitable woman and then live with her. That suitable woman is Mija. I'm sorry. You said you weren't interested in marriage. I thought if I just provided money, everything would work out. A question popped into my mind. Then why did you badmouth me to my in-laws? Had it not been for those rumors, I wouldn't have been so suspicious. I wanted her to be my real wife. I despised living with Samantha, whom I didn't even love, so I wanted to divorce you somehow." Do you realize how selfish you sound? Bob seemed to shrink even further. I'm sorry. I've always been told I wouldn't be a real man unless I got married, so I thought I had to get married at any cost. I believed that once I was divorced, no one would bother me about remarrying. Bob assumed that once divorced, his parents wouldn't interfere with his remarriage, so he could then focus on his affair. All he needed was an excuse for the divorce. He had to make it seem like it was my fault, not his. That's why he tarnished my reputation. The reason for setting the living expenses at $100 was that he didn't want me to find out about his infidelity. He figured if he only gave me $100, I wouldn't be able to investigate, and if I worked full-time, I probably wouldn't have the time to look into it. It seems he never thought of using a private investigator. Such recklessness led to his downfall, and now Bob had to apologize in front of the family. You knew an affair was the one thing you shouldn't have done, right? You even betrayed Samantha, who has done so much for you. Veins were bulging on his mother-in-law's forehead. Her anger seemed endless. Bob was shedding tears and snot. "Bob, you're the disgrace of this family. We're cutting ties with you." Everyone in the family was shocked. Probably what his mother-in-law says is the final word in this household. His father-in-law nodded in agreement. Bob no longer had a place in this house. In front of all the relatives, Bob's affair and lies were exposed. His own mother told him they were cutting ties. Dizzy and crying, Bob silently left the room. After Bob left, his mother-in-law came to me, holding my hand and apologizing. "Samantha, I'm so sorry for what Bob did. You can divorce him if you want. We won't blame you." With tears in her eyes, his mother-in-law continued holding my hand. "We were so deceived by Bob. We're so sorry for shouting at you for no reason, Samantha." I always thought his father-in-law was a silent and stubborn man, but he was quick to admit his mistakes and apologize. He's a good person, and I realize this family runs smoothly thanks to his mother-in-law. They're such good parents. I wonder why Bob became so deceitful and disrespectful. I reconciled with my in-laws, and shortly after, my divorce with Bob was finalized. The divorce went just as Bob wanted. After being disowned by his family due to the affair, it seems Bob lost his backing from a prominent family. I heard he's been demoted at work and is now in a less significant position. His income decreased significantly, and his mistress got tired of him and left. I got this info from Bob's mother-in-law. From the Waters family, I received more than twice the usual amount. I assume part of it was hush money. Now that I have some extra money, I'm indulging in luxury trips abroad a few times a year. The apartment they prepared for me and Bob is mine to use as long as I want. Bob was hardly ever there, so I'm living freely without any memories of him. The only good thing Bob ever did was encouraging me to return to work. Thanks to that, I have a stable income now, and it seems I won't face any financial difficulties. I occasionally keep in touch with my ex-father-in-law and the rest. They invite me to their New Year's gatherings, but I decline.